Asyle. Tropical Island Survival. Week 37, Day 1. This is it, my 10th month on the island, and go time for the dome. Or it would be, ideally, if all the glass panels were done. I think I have to face the fact that the dome isn't going to be ready in time for the smugglers' arrival, unless they're a week late or something, so I need to change tact and be ready to go on the offensive. For the time being, however, since there wasn't too much more I could do for the dome but wait, I figured I might as well do my maintenance rounds on the base, though I did so feeling a bit anxious about all the other things that needed to be done. Of course, the first thing I did in the morning was start up the solar kiln as usual, and that was the thing that had been doing the most work this month. Not so much the kiln itself as the elevator, having to load all that sand and glass up and down all month. So while I was going up and down this morning, I took special care to notice if there were any places where rope or wood were rubbing up against each other and possibly wearing out, because I didn't want the elevator to catastrophically fail. There were some streaks up the sides of the elevator and the elevator shaft where rubbing had occurred, and several of the pulleys were worn. Fortunately, though, they've done a good job of keeping the wear off of the ropes themselves, so I made a note to replace some of the pulleys and build little wheels or rollers to attach onto the sides of the elevator to help it travel up and down the shaft more smoothly from now on. I checked the trot lines while I was collecting fish, and because I hadn't been using it much, there wasn't a lot that needed repair or replacement. Same deal with the chicken houses when I went foraging. I brought a little extra wood and bamboo back with me to build those pulleys and rollers before beginning my full sweep of the base. Beach hut. Not a lot of action this month, or maintenance needed since I varnished it. Front gate. It's basically brand new, so it didn't need any attention. Lampposts. Brand new, still had plenty of fuel. Workshop. As usual, it's seen a lot of action this month, mostly cutting, trimming, and building the wooden elements for the dome. The grindstone was basically fine, because it's stone, but my bamboo shaving tool was getting worn out, so I built another cord peeler out of volcanic glass, for when the one I have finally breaks. Bathhouse. Everything was still pretty clean. Plants around the perimeter were growing in nicely. Hardly ever used the pool. Emptied the toilet pots and washed down the shower. Kitchen. I refilled the ethanol in the refrigeration system as always, but it was otherwise clean and tidy in there. Plenty of food and salt in cold storage below. There were a few cracks in the kiln, and I patched them up with some leftover mortar from working on the dome interior the other day. Garden. Water was still flowing, plants were growing, no signs of mildew. Frogs in the taro terraces were chirping. The arbor was fine and weatherproof. The music machine could probably use a tune-up. Back gate was strong and secure. Water was still flowing to the orchard past the bamboo hedge, which was itself starting to look a little thin and sad from all the bamboo work I've been doing. Need to give it some time to recharge this coming month. Lab. Hasn't been too active this month, but I restarted the nitric acid bubbler in anticipation of needing to make more explosives for mining or defenses this month. Cleaned up the unidentifiable chemical goop that's been building up inside. Greased up the windmill and generator elements, which reminded me of how much work I still had left to do with the dome, and how much I needed to find a larger, more stable source of electrical energy. I stopped for lunch before continuing. House. The radio batteries needed to be recharged. Again, I don't know why I haven't gotten a response to my distress calls, and I checked to make sure that it was still working, and I could still hear it on my own radio. Wiped last week's records, refilled the typewriter, got out any laundry I thought needed cleaning. I noticed while checking on my meteorological equipment that there had been a drop in atmospheric pressure over the past few days. I expect the dry season is coming to an end, and gray skies are headed my way. On the one hand, I welcome a respite from the oppressive sun and heat, but on the other hand, I'm worried about storms, so I need to make additional storm-proofing of my base a priority. Panic room. I checked the periscope alignment with all the major viewing points, and ran out to clean or adjust anything I thought needed it. The battery for the acoustic array is charging. Solar dazzler mirror is clean. The armor's repaired. Still have plenty of shotgun and mortar ammo. The revolving alcove needed a little grease and adjustment, having settled a bit over the past month of weight on it. I went down into the tunnels and was reminded that I needed to line them with lights, but I can do that when I pipe power into the dome. Also checked on the rotating passage and tunnel exits, which seemed to still be secure. Besides that, I couldn't think of much else that needed attention. All the extra equipment I'd made for the dome was either new or going to be torn down when I was done, so I was a little surprised that I had some time left at the end of the day. I decided to remove the latex I fluffed up yesterday from the pits I made for them, and spent some time tying them into the armchairs I made for the dome. I'd never done upholstery before, and it was a bit of a learning curve, but eventually I ended up with something I was pleased with. The foam chairs were certainly cushy, but the texture of sitting on a big sponge wasn't really comfortable. So at the end of the day, I got the mountain of sawdust I'd made from working on this project soaking and grinding in alkali before spinning it into fibers and loading it into the auto loom to run overnight. I should only need a few square meters of fabric to completely cover the chairs. Week 37, Day 2. I checked the horizon a little more thoroughly than usual this morning. I think it's worth mentioning that I've been having nightmares since the last smuggler encounter. I've just been too busy to write about them, and I didn't want to dwell on them, but they've only gotten worse as the month has progressed. It's definitely crunch time for me this week, and while I was out foraging this morning, I dropped by the bunker and pulled out the huacha, just so it would be ready at a moment's notice. When I was done, I pulled the fabric from the loom and started installing it on the chairs. Again, it was a pretty amateurish job, but I managed to at least make something comfy. I couldn't rest in them for very long, though, because I started working on the garden beds next. It occurred to me that I could probably make them hydroponic, but I didn't really have a mechanism to keep the water flowing and oxygenated. Besides, using dirt would add a little more ballast, so I spent the rest of the morning wheelbarrowing some of the best island soil I could find onto the catamaran and ferrying it over to the dome. This was mostly a mixture of pumice and sand for drainage, with clay to help hold in moisture and diffuse minerals on the top, along with some of my compost, though I won't be using the compost for my root vegetables. After lunch, I started collecting a few plants to go in the planters. I started, of course, with the mangrove saplings, which would be growing straight out of the salt water below the floor. I also got some bamboo starts and planted them and some banana plants next to the surface of the dome, because these would need the most sunlight. While I was removing the seedlings that had sprouted up from the parent mangrove trees, I checked to see if the parents produced a useful sap, and while it was a milky white substance, it didn't appear to be latex, so I also dug up a breadfruit sapling for food and latex production in the dome. I considered using a faster-growing fig plant, but I don't want it to accidentally become overgrown and destroy the dome from the inside. The yams and taro, on the other hand, were understory plants with broad leaves, so I planted them in wall planters near the center of the dome, where they would get less natural light, though this may be supplemented by the electric lamps I'll install later. That got me thinking, however, about how much copper I was going to need for all the wiring, so at the end of the day, I decided to start the explosives machine up again in preparation for more mining. It would also be a little reassuring to have the extra rounds on hand if/when the smugglers come, because if the pattern holds, they'll be coming with even bigger guns, and I'm not ready for them. Week 37, Day 3. I tried to go to sleep early last night, but it was hard, feeling like the smugglers could start approaching at any minute. At least this was the last day of glass production, thank God. I was exhausted from waking up every 15 minutes or so, but I still hadn't heard anything on the hydrophone. Let's hope it stays that way a little while longer. I wasn't going to wait for all the glass to finish before I started, though. I had stacks and stacks of the bowl-shaped windows piled up, and I expected I would be able to install them all by the end of the day, when the last batch was finally finished. So as soon as I was done with my morning chores, I started ferrying the stacks over and installing them in the bamboo frames I built, using a liberal amount of latex to seal them all up. I discovered a slight problem as I worked my way up the dome. I was expecting the air pressure inside the finished dome to hold the glass panels up against gravity, but while I was installing them, there was no such force to hold them in place. Fortunately, I put grooves in the frames to snap the panels into, which held them up and gave me a smaller seam on which to apply the latex. This didn't affect the pane's ability to press against each other and distribute a compressive load, but I was concerned about the possibility that the dome would flex and the rope would stretch when the thing was finally sealed and sunk, which could cause leaks, so I intentionally made the dome's framework just a little bit smaller than the glass panes, causing them to overlap unevenly or require me to carefully wedge them into place. This was so that they would fit properly if/when the framework expanded under tension. Another problem I encountered was that I didn't account for the sheer weight of the glass panels as ballast, so I found I had to bail out some of the sand from the foundation as I went to keep everything at a level I felt safely buoyant at, though it bugged me that I would just have to turn around and repeat this operation again later. I stopped for lunch in the middle of the day, but for the most part, I was just installing and caulking glass. At the end of the day, I still had a couple of batches of glass left to wait on, so in the meantime, I got some bamboo scraps and built the hatch for the apex of the dome. It consisted of 2 rings with spokes on a shallow arch in the center, just like the shape of the glass panes, and woven together with smaller sticks like a basket. In between them, however, I put a short section of rope with a crossbar inside. The idea was that, when I tightened the cord, the 2 hatches would sandwich the oculus of the dome between them, creating a watertight seal once latex was applied, which I also used to seal the gaps in the basket structure. At the end of the day, I managed to install the last glass panes, still warm from the kiln, into the ceiling of the dome's upper section, and collapsed into the armchair. I was tempted to fall asleep right there, but hunger kept me awake long enough to get ready for bed. Good thing, too, otherwise I wouldn't have been sleeping in range of the hydrophone. Week 37, Day 4. I woke up a little surprised that the smugglers hadn't arrived yet, but that only heightened my anxiety. At the same time, the dome was so close to being done that I was starting to hold out hope that I might be able to get it finished and into the water after all. There were several steps that still had to be done, though. I needed to tow and anchor it to the right spot, at the end of the lava tube. I needed to finish filling up the foundation with ballast, and there was still a lot to fill. I wanted to give the glass panels another layer of latex just to be extra safe, and of course, I still needed to build an air pump, but I figured I could cannibalize the parts from the sand pump for that purpose when I was finished with it. With all that in mind, when I went out to do my morning chores, I tapped a few extra trees for latex than usual, so I would have plenty. I then prepared some ropes and pulleys before taking a dive down to the entrance of the lava tube. I found a few sturdy boulders and tied the ropes and pulleys to them. The idea was that, while they wouldn't be strong enough to hold the dome down at full buoyancy, if I could get the dome down to almost neutral buoyancy, they would hold it down easily, and I could slacken the lines if and when I wanted the dome to rise to the surface. I attached a float to the end of the ropes, and then towed the dome out to the sink site, tying it off to the anchor line. I designed the ropes and pulleys for this system in such a way that the force would, once again, be distributed evenly around the perimeter of the dome, using a single rope. This was so that, if the rope breaks for whatever reason, the whole dome wouldn't list to one side, but the whole system will become slack all at once, and it'll float straight to the surface. Could probably do with a backup line just in case, so it doesn't float out to sea in the middle of the night if there's a problem. I then adjusted the position of the sand pump's outlet and allowed it to start pumping into the foundation again. I stood inside the dome and paid careful attention as the foundation filled first with water. At that point, the dome seemed to shift downward more quickly than it was before, as now it was only the air inside the dome providing buoyancy. I brought my rebreather with me just in case I needed to make a hasty escape. The dome bubbled aggressively around the perimeter as it started to sink, but eventually an equilibrium was reached, and it stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief, but only for the moment, as I looked around the edge where the water had come up over the windows for leaks on the inside, bubbles on the outside, or the hissing of escaping air between the panels, any of which could lead to a catastrophic failure or loss of pressure later. For the moment there didn't seem to be anything, but the pressure in the dome wasn't very high yet. Still, the water rose higher on the outside of the dome than I expected it initially would, and if there was a leak or loss of pressure, the water inside the dome would steadily rise and flood the lower level, which would, at the very least, be quite a mess for me to clean up. In the event that this started to happen, I would need a way to either pump the water out so I could reach the leak to seal it, or I would need a way to lighten the ballast so it would stop sinking long enough for me to deal with it. I decided the simplest solution to that would be to tie the dome to my boat and let the line out slowly so I could control its rate of sinking a bit more completely. As I did, a light drizzle started to mist down my dry face. First rain I'd seen in quite a while, and it was hard to tell if it was a good or bad omen. In the meantime, all I could really do was wait and seal leaks as I found them. I figured it was going to take days for the sand pump to fill up the foundation enough, so I would have plenty of time to keep on top of it. So at that point, I stopped for lunch and collected a little more latex to thicken the seals. I realized another slight problem with getting in and out of the dome at that point, namely that I couldn't, at least not through the escape hatch. Doing so would let the air out of the dome and cause it to flood, so I had to swim to the main entrance with any equipment I wanted to bring with me, protected by my rubber diving bag, namely the latex for thickening the seals in the dome. When I was done, I was kind of surprised that I had some extra time at the end of the day, and at first I just took a break, sitting and looking out through the dome. The drizzle had intensified into a gentle shower, and the pitter-patter sound, watching the rain slide down and collect into the bottoms of the bowl-shaped windows, reminded me of rainy days at home, cozy and insulated indoors. The rain also reminded me that I needed to start getting the base ready for bad weather. The windmills at least already had mechanisms in place to reduce how badly they'd be affected by the wind. The harder it blows, the more their blades should bend, so they never experience more torque or speed on their shafts than their flyball governors will allow. The one I was concerned about was the solar tower. I hate to think about all those fragile plates rattling around and crashing into each other in high winds. One fortunate factor about the design, however, is that the shape of the funnel they form is round, meaning wind will tend to blow around them, and the stretchiness of their components means that parts should flex in the wind, like the fronds of a palm tree, though this also means they'll bounce back when the wind stops. The plates should also be protected from flying debris, hitting the outside framing instead of the plates themselves. Honestly, just tightening everything up is probably a better overall strategy for the solar tower than trying to take the panels down, which may incur even more damage in the process. I decided to head back to shore and put on my rain poncho to start working on that, even preparing a few small dampers to help control any recoil the panels may experience from a sudden cessation of wind. And while I was up on the tower, I noticed just how much rainwater was being collected and poured right down onto the kiln. It made it hard to work, but it also gave me an idea. I was thinking about how much of a shame it was going to be during the wet season that I wouldn't be able to use the solar tower. And while that's true for cooking, I might still be able to use it to collect rainwater, both for drinking and for stored mechanical energy. So when I was done tying everything off, I found myself some bamboo, split it, and hollowed it into troughs and pipes, which I then installed on each panel and ran down into the cistern immediately below. Of course, there was no telling what particles or contaminants would be in the rain, or washed off the reflector panels, bird poop in particular, so I divided the rainwater into several charcoal filter tubes, the division allowing the water to flow through the system quickly without becoming plugged up or overflowing due to the slow filter rate of the charcoal. This wrapped me up for the day, and I found the rain so refreshing that I didn't really need a shower before I went to bed. I did need a towel, though. Week 37, Day 5. Still nothing on the hydrophone. What's taking them so long? I didn't leave the sand pump running overnight because I didn't want to take the chance that the dome might submerge without my supervision. And after my morning chores, I lined the dome with another round of latex, while the foundation continued to fill with sand. The rain had stopped, and the sun had come back, which was unfortunate in some ways, but in others, it gave me hope that the solar tower would be completely useless for cooking during the wet season, just weather dependent. I decided to spend most of the day cleaning up from this project, particularly all the wood and sawdust from the bamboo, so I set most of it soaking and grinding into fibers for cloth, also figuring that I could re-soak and mash the cloth back down into paper if I needed it in that form later. This process was automated enough at that point that I had time in between thread reels to check on the dome and hydrophone. I also collected the music machine from its alcove so it would be better protected from the coming rains, though it did end up taking up a lot of space in the workshop. I stopped for lunch and applied another round of latex to the dome. Every drop I had was going into this thing to make it completely leak-proof. At that point, the water line was up to my eyes on the dome's windows, and although there had been a few small leaks as the pressure built, I managed to keep up with them. Because of the pressure differential, these leaks mercifully resulted in air bubbling out of the cracks, while water leaked into the space under the floor, making it easy to apply the latex seal, which got sucked into the relevant crevices by the pressure differential where they solidified, instead of being diluted from seawater slowly spilling in. A very advantageous quirk of physics indeed. I then got back to cloth production until the end of the day, leaving the loom to run overnight. Week 37, Day 6. Another night passed without incident. I'm starting to wonder if they aren't coming back. Maybe I scared them off for good. I can't afford to get complacent, though. When I was done with my morning chores and resetting the sand pump, I got back into the dome and checked for leaks. I found that apparently there was a slow leak during the night that caused the dome to start filling with water a little bit, but fortunately, it hadn't reached the lower floor yet. To fix this, I rejiggered the sand pump to temporarily pump air into the dome instead of sand, which displaced the water while I finished applying another layer of latex to the seams. The water line was starting to reach up to the second level, meaning there wasn't much more air to displace, and the dome would soon completely submerge. Although I kept up the sawdust dissolving during the day, I eventually spent more time close to the dome, watching as its apex sank lower and lower into the water. A little after lunch, the hatch finally started getting lapped by the waves, and I figured at that point it was pretty much neutrally buoyant, so I untethered the dome from the boat and started tugging on the pulley ropes to gently lower the dome to the seafloor. When I let go of the ropes, the dome didn't seem to make much of an effort to rise, so I dove down and tied the ropes off. In some ways, the dome is finally finished, and in others, it's finally ready to begin working on it. I quickly returned to shore and started disassembling the sand pump, reorienting the pipe vertically so it would pump air into the dome, and collecting some stones and coconut shells to act as variable height floats and sinkers for the air pumps, which I took from the water wheel. I had to assemble much of the mechanism underwater, which made things a little harder, but once I did, air started bubbling into the pool beneath the dome and displacing any water that had leaked in since I last checked it. When I went inside, I found that, despite my best efforts, there were some wet leaks around the ceiling of the upper dome, and the escape hatch in particular, and the first floor was starting to flood. Thinking quickly, I got one of my rubberized sails and draped it over the top of the submerged dome to keep any more water from getting in, tying it off to the dome's frame with rope. The air leaking out created an insulating bubble around the glass surface, and once I dried off the area, I applied a lot more latex to seal it up. I continued inspecting the seams and sealing up any spots that looked weak, but eventually I was able to confirm that the water level below the decking was going down, meaning the wave pump was keeping up with any leaks that were occurring. As it started getting a little dark outside, I considered sleeping down there for the night, but I didn't want to be caught off guard if something went wrong, so I swam out and started getting ready for bed. Week 37, Day 7. It's Sabbath, and the more time goes by, the more I think the smugglers are either really late or they've given up, which is good news for me either way. Still, the anxiety of not knowing for certain lingers. Today was not a day for anxiety, however. I conducted my morning chores and performed my transcriptions in sermon time. The rains had returned, so I was a bit wet from foraging, but I was enjoying the sound of the rain while I typed. I noticed that my supply of soap, shampoo, and toothpaste was starting to run a little low, so I collected a few extra plants from the forest for those purposes, and I made a new batch, setting a little aside for the bathroom in the dome. When I was done, I had lunch, and given that there wasn't a lot else to do while it was raining, I went down into the tunnels, put on my diving suit, and walked out to the dome. I found that, for such a short walk, I didn't actually have to use my superoxide air scrubbers. The air bladders inside the suit were large enough to hold enough air that I didn't suffocate on my way to the dome. Once there, I tested that the elevator was working as expected. I liked how wearing the suit meant I didn't have to dry myself off once I was in the dome, and I could get straight to work on whatever needed to be done there. After all the construction this past month, there were certainly a few things that still needed to be done, mostly in the realm of cleaning up and mopping the floors. I spent some time working on that and tending to the gardens. Obviously, the plants hadn't grown much yet. I just wanted to make sure they didn't die and didn't have too much or too little water. I then spent some time on the upper deck, just watching the sea life. The green tint of the volcanic glass gave the ocean a much more aquamarine color than it actually had, but I didn't mind. The greenness reminds me of the ocean at home, always so murky with decaying seaweed. The fish darted to and fro like squabbling birds, many investigating the strange structure that fell into their midst yesterday. Already, many fish have made their home in the pool underneath the dome, having chosen it as a new hiding place. Every now and then, a reef shark would swim up to the dome. Although my suit was designed to withstand their bites, and possibly even bullets, I haven't gotten up the nerve yet to walk up to one, as much as I've always wanted to pet a shark. Still, seeing them come up to the window reminded me not only of aquariums, but something I'd heard about native Polynesians, that they would build shark collars out of coconut shells, feed the sharks, and often would have sharks specific to their family. This gave me an idea to build my own shark collar, to bring them to the dome for me to watch, and possibly program with conditioned response for different tasks, or at least whatever tasks a shark might be useful for. I didn't have the materials for this down in the dome, so I got in my suit and returned to base for a little construction, though with the rain, I might as well have kept the diving suit on. I'm now starting to regret having several separate buildings rather than having everything under one roof. As I built the shark collar, I was aware that the sharks wouldn't just come when they were called unless they had an incentive, so I also got the idea to make a sort of Chum bubbler. A simple rubber bulb that I could squeeze to squirt a soup of blood and fish bits into the water for the sharks to snack on, again, without me having to go out. The bulb wouldn't finish setting until tomorrow, of course, so in the meantime, I built a little jar lid specifically for accepting the bulb and keeping the chum stench in, as well as making a bamboo tube and hose to lead out into the water, making sure it was of a large enough diameter that the fish chunks will be able to get out as easily as the juice. As the day began to end, the rain went on, but I could still see the pink-orange glow of the sunset in the distance, which created a very distinctive mood that I quite liked. I spent some time writing in the evening before going to bed. Blooper Reel. There were some streaks up this, so I made an excuse me, before spinning it into fibers and loading it into the kiln to run. What? Kiln? Fibers don't go in the kiln. Why the heck did I write that? Because these would need the most sunlight. Ah! Ah! Causing them to overact. The two hatches would sandwich the oculus, which I also used to seal the gaps in the basket structure. Excuse me. I was tempted to tempted to fall asleep right there. Could probably do with a backup. Pause for text check. Than I expected it initially would. That's hard to say. When I was done, excuse me, which I then installed on each panel. This wrapped me up for the. I decided. Do you suffer from excessive saliva? You may be entitled to compensation. I decided to spend. Why am I only noticing that's funny now? Okay, get the laughter out. Get the laughter out. Okay, can we continue? Thank you. Although I kept up the sawdust grinding during the day. Although I kept up the sawdust grinding during the day. It's not grinding, it's dissolving. Who wrote this? Who wrote this script? Oh, wait, that's me. The first floor was starting. And the second, still seeing them come up to the seeing them coming up to read the words. Hey there. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. It's a relief to have the dome finished, though I'm still a little confused about why the smugglers have been delayed. In the meantime, it looks like I'll have a new enemy to contend with, the weather. At least it isn't actively trying to kill me, so if you want to see how that war goes, you can press the subscribe and bell buttons to find out what I make next. Probably some kind of weather control machine, no big deal. Now, although I'm not doing YouTube for money, it would help me out more than anything else if you could share this video with someone who you think would enjoy it. And since you enjoyed it enough to watch it for this long, you can press the like button to say so, and tell the algorithm to do a little bit of that sharing for you. Also, if you'd like to chat about some of your own stories and perspectives on the episode, maybe about a project you finished just under the wire, or if you just want to talk about your favorite Jules Verne books, feel free to share them in the comments section below. I genuinely love to hear them, and I'm always open to suggestions and corrections. That said, thanks again for listening, and hope to see you here again next week.